Here we are, beautiful community center. Councilman Coffin, I know you're exceptionally thrilled to be here because this is home turf. I've never been in this room with a setup like this. And how nice for us to have this joint meeting. All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The December 6, 2016 special City Council meeting is called to order. Chairman Moody, would you call the Special Planning Commission meeting to order, please?
Certainly. Thank you, Mayor. This December 6, 2016 Special Planning Commission meeting is called to order.
Okay, the Special City Council and Planning Commission meeting of December 6, 2016 has been properly noticed and posted in compliance with the open meeting law. For public comment related to items on the agenda, citizen participation and public hearing items, we have available a speaker card which you may complete and submit to the city clerk over there on your right. Cards are available online at the back of the meeting room, but if you don't submit a card, it does not prevent you from speaking under public comment or citizen participation. Before we proceed with the agenda, would everyone please rise for the pledge?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. I'm going through these pages. Nothing. There we go. Agenda item number 4. Public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters on the agenda for action. The amount of time any single speaker is allowed may be limited. All comments made will be cross-referenced to those specific items. If anyone submitted a speaker card or who wishes to speak under this portion of the agenda, please come up front to the podium and state your name for the record. We'll set the time at 1 minute. For Lowenstein. Okay, seeing the great rush to the microphone, we will now move on to agenda item 5. Discussion for possible action to receive a presentation regarding the development and implementation of an urban form development code for the downtown Las Vegas Vision 2045 master plan. Provide direction to staff on matters related thereto in reference to all wards. Good afternoon. Eric.
Good afternoon, Your Honor, Mr. Chairman, and members of the Planning Commission City Council. For the record, Tom Perico, Planning Director. Very excited about this afternoon. This is where we take the next step in the developing and creating the future for our downtown. This plan that both of these bodies adopted is a very bold and courageous vision for our future that will drive our downtown development. Indeed, it will impact our entire city. So we're at a pivotal moment in the implementation of this, where we need to start looking at the proper types of codes that will give us the kind of development that has been envisioned in this document. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Summerfield. We have a great program this afternoon. We're very excited. He's going to introduce our speaker, and very excited to hear input from you as we go on. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council members, Planning Commissioner. Again, Robert Summerfield, Department of Planning for the record. So this afternoon we have invited Lisa Wise and Roger Eastman from Lisa Wise Consulting. Lisa Wise Consulting is one of the foremost experts in the development of urban form or form-based codes. And so we've invited them here to give an overview to this dual body to describe one of the ways that we can implement this vision that these bodies have endorsed, that our community has embraced, and that we think will be the way to get us to that next level and that next piece of becoming a world-class city, particularly in our downtown area. Just real quickly, I'm going to intro Lisa and Roger. So Lisa Wise is a CPA. in her former life, she was a banker and financier, actually working on Wall Street, helping development opportunities occur and helping them get their financing. So she's very familiar with what is needed for development to kind of make the grade in terms of getting its financing. For the last 10 years, she has run Lisa Wise Consulting. She's also currently the president of the Form-Based Code Institute, a national organization that helps promote form-based codes. And so one of the items that you have is just a real brief kind of overview on what Lisa Wise Consulting does and what their history is. You also have a couple brochures from the Form-Based Code Institute that kind of gives some additional reference points if you like some additional information. We also have Roger Eastman, who is with Lisa Wise Consulting. He is a 25-year, not native of the Southwest, as you'll hear when you hear him speak, but a 25-year resident in the desert Southwest in different communities, helping them plan for and develop the future of those communities. And he currently is on the executive committee for the Arizona chapter of the American Planning Association. So quite a bit of experience in a wide variety of opportunities. And so I think you will find that they are here to answer any and all of your questions about what a form-based code, an urban form code can be. And with that, I will turn it over to Lisa.
Just take one thing to set the table and just say, why do we need it? Why do we need to change? What is the reason? So, people can understand why they're saying this.
Well, I don't want to steal any of Lisa's thunder. That's in her presentation, and she is going to kind of walk us through one of the things that we know when we did the vision for downtown. We know that there are some gaps, some inconsistencies with our current zoning that do not afford the best environment for our development community to move projects forward. And we believe that this is a tool that can help us improve that environment, not just for our development community, but our citizens at large, so that they can know and feel what their downtown could be, should be, and will be. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you. Welcome. We're delighted and appreciate your taking the time to do this with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council, members of the Planning Commission. It's really a pleasure to be here as you take this next step. We were part of the master planning process, and it's exciting to see the city move forward. Really, the objective of the purpose of the meeting is educational and to answer questions. We have about a 30-minute presentation looking at different regulatory tools, although focusing on an urban forward code, because that'll be a new tool to the city, but it's really to help you make a decision on the right approach for the city moving forward. So I'm going to start it off. I have about 10 slides, and then Roger will come up from my office and cover a couple things, and then I'll wrap it up talking a little bit about market trends. Maybe.
Just right here. It's a little sensitive.
It's the first test. So I want to talk a little bit about the master plan. You did go through a successful master planning project, so it is your planning document. It lays the vision or the foundation for your code, so it's important just to remember what's in there. So I'm going to go give you a high level of that. And then as part of that master planning process, we went through what's called a diagnostic analysis of your current code, really looking at what was working and not working and the complicated structure of your existing regulations and how it implements or does not implement your vision. So I want to look at that a little bit. And then Roger's going to come up and explain what an urban form code is, looking at other examples in different jurisdictions and how they could be applied here. And then we're going to wrap it up with a few slides on market trends, sort of just where's the market going in terms of development and opportunities. And then we have 3 case studies to look at in different jurisdictions that have adopted an urban form code as a tool. So your master planning process, it really was a impressive undertaking, bold vision. I think it sets a really great groundwork for the next steps. We're galvanizing revitalization and looking at public-private partnerships, infrastructure investments, and improving the quality of life, in particular for downtown. So taking that as the foundation, how do we get from where we are today, moving forward into this century? So one of the organizing principles of the master plan are these 5 big ideas. Of course, these are all interrelated in terms of how you achieve your vision, but we want to focus on a few of these today. Thinking about creating mixed-use hubs was a key component of that vision. Looking at creating streets for people or complete streets so that you have a multimodal perspective. Streets are not just based on cars. And then expediting the implementation. So thinking about the governance, the regulatory tools that implement your vision. So we're going to go through these, a couple of these one by one. So this mixed-use hub idea in the master plan, there's 10 mixed-use hubs. They look at your arts district, medical, civic, the Fremont with of course, resort and tourism. So thinking about these hubs and why they're important. I mean, I think the complete planning area is about 8,500 acres, and even your downtown core is about 1,100 acres, so it's a really, really large area. So to achieve the vision, it's important to sort of focus your efforts and your investments on a particular node, to kind of think about how are these different, how are they the same, and what it'll take to achieve some of the ideas in the vision. And when you went through your planning process, you looked at development opportunities and how many additional units or square feet of commercial development you would get. And the city opted for the most aggressive option. So to, go from where you are today to the next step and sort of this aggressive option of 12 million additional square feet of development, it's going to take a lot of different interventions and a lot of different focus from the council, planning commission, and members of the public. So how do you get from here to there? And what do you do? And I think one of the most important tools the city has is the zoning and regulatory tool. That's one of the components that you have the most control over. And then, of course, one of your other big ideas was implementation, really focusing on the next steps. What are the priorities and how do you get from here to there? And part of that was looking at what your master plan called a form-based code, or what we're calling today an urban form code. Same thing, so if you use both terms, that's what we're talking about. So looking at your regulatory environment and creating a more of an urban form code. And this is, you have, I think, 36 action items throughout the master plan. A lot of them do focus on your regulatory environment, streamlining the process, developing incentives for the kind of projects you want to see on the ground, and updating your zoning. So this is a page from your master plan looking at existing conditions and sort of then looking into the future of how that could look down the road. So going from what the images on the left to the images on the right, and what that takes. And it takes a lot of things working together at the public and the private sector. But it's not just the zoning, it's also the streets too. The public and the private realm need to work together to achieve the kind of images and vision and things you talk about in your master plan. So while we're going to be mostly talking about zoning, we just don't want to forget that the streets are an important component of this as you sort of move forward. So as I said, we did also look at the existing regulations in your Centennial Plan. And as many of you know, it's sort of a complex web of regulations. It's not only in the Centennial Plan, but in Title 19. They come together for regulations on downtown, what makes it a difficult system to navigate. I mean, it's not completely unique, but it is fairly complex. So there's 31 overlapping zones that regulate your downtown area, and the Centennial Plan is the image on the left. It doesn't even cover your entire downtown plan now, so that's another thing to take into account. But when you're combining regulations from two different documents, sometimes you get inconsistencies, and it might not develop the form you're looking for now. Another thing in your Centennial Plan is it doesn't really regulate development. It's sort of a transaction-based system. There's limited height, setback, building footprint, frontage regulation. So developers don't know what's expected. They come in on a case-by-case basis and sort of work through the process in the site plan review. So this is an overlap. The bolder black lines are the centennial districts, and then it's all your zoning. I think the Arts District, for instance, is regulated by 6 different zones. So your land uses are in Title 19, and your regulations are in your Centennial Plan. The Northern Gateway, same thing. You know, a lot of different stuff going on. So you're kind of bringing both things together. And when we went through the code, it doesn't look like they're working together in a lot of circumstances. So the next slide is a table that goes through. There's a document on this too. These are the Centennial Plan districts on the left, and it shows you the overlapping Title 19 districts and how you would have to go back and forth and understand how they work together and what the city is looking for in terms of expectations. And again, it's often done on a case-by-case basis. Sorry at the... So this slide, I'm not trying to get too back and forth, apologize for that, but I know you have it in front of you anyway. This is Title 19, this is the land uses. It shows how land uses are regulated in the Gateway, the Northern Gateway District. Again, it's just an example of going back and forth and thinking about, are these the right land uses in that district? Are they regulated in the Centennial Plan right? And how would you achieve your current vision and your master plan with this kind of system? So I want to talk a little bit then about the Arts District. It's really the cultural hub of the city. There's a lot going on, galleries, shops, entertainment. So the vision and the master plan is really, you know, encouraging that, more maker centers, things like that in the Arts District. But your current code would allow this kind of development. The code doesn't regulate height, it does not regulate setback, it does not regulate lot coverage, and there's really minimal frontage standards. So you could have a wide range of outcomes. And it could be this kind of massing and these kind of building types. But what your master plan has said is really looking for something like this. Low to medium density, really pedestrian oriented, a lot of active frontages, a multimodal transit hub, some of these components. And it's not impossible to achieve it with your current regulatory environment, but you might not get the outcome or the expectations you want with your current system. So with this, I was going to turn it over to Roger. He's going to talk about a little bit about urban form codes and explain sort of how they stack up against conventional codes and some examples from other places. Mr. Eastman?
Thank you, Lisa. Madam Mayor, Mr. Chairman of the Planning Commission, members of the Council, Commission, and staff, pleasure to be with you this afternoon. My role today is to help introduce you to the urban form code, give you a little bit of background to what these things are. I've been told not to be too technical. I'll do my best to ensure that I can speak to you all. My name is Roger Eastman with Lisa Weiss Consulting. So I'll try to keep this in fairly simple language and stay away from the legalese. So let's start by just talking about some of the options for how cities regulate their zoning, their zones, their land development code, however we like to call it. And very often, and this is certainly true for most of the American cities, it's a use-based code. Cities are regulated based on the use, single-family residential, the various density types, medium-density residential, commercial, and so on. And as you can see in the handout, you can really limit density this way. It becomes fairly homogeneous in its application. You can separate incompatible uses, keep your residences away from your industry, and so on. Problem, though, as I'll go into in a little more detail, very often a use-based or conventional code lacks certainty. And so neighbors don't necessarily always understand what kind of new development may come in, and a developer doesn't always know what kind of entitlement he has or she has. A performance-based code is very often used to deal with the protection of natural resources. If you want to protect a certain part of the desert or a floodplain or a slope, you can set up very specific performance-based standards where you analyze the property, and based on that analysis, you get to know how much you can develop on the property. So there's a lot of quantitative data that's involved, which makes them complicated, and that can be a real impediment to their use. An urban form code or form-based code, as its name suggests, is really about the form of a place, the relationship of buildings to buildings and buildings to the street. And what that type of code tends to do then, as you have done with your vision, is promote a more walkable urban place, more mobility options, and create an environment where perhaps you would encourage mixed-use development. One of the downsides to a form-based code or urban form code is they can be complicated to put in place, but once they're in place and people understand them, they can become very, very effective as a tool within the community. And then finally, you can do a combination. And both Lisa and I have worked on a number of codes where both use-based and urban form standards are combined into a hybrid code. So let's just pause for a moment and think about where zoning came from. Well, it really came from the industrial era, where you had people living in amongst the factories where they worked. And obviously that created all sorts of problems, and it resulted in codes that really were designed to separate uses. And you can see it very clearly in this graphic where the RS10 single-family residential is separate from the red commercial and so on. This all came out of a court case in the 1926, I believe it was, and this is where this U.S. Supreme Court said, cities, you may regulate a private property and regulate the use on that property. And this is what happened. And this is not just unique in Las Vegas, but it's honestly all over the country where we separated our uses so well. You have pods of commercial development separated by some form of open space with residences behind. And the tools that we use are really imprecise in conventional or Euclidean zoning. This is one of the metrics, floor area ratio. Don't get hung up on the term. It's a measurement of intensity. And an intensity of 1 means it's the relationship of all the square footage that's allowed, the floors of the building, relative to the size of the site. And an FAR of 1 doesn't really mean much because it could be a tower or it could be something smaller. Both of these properties have an FAR, an intensity ratio of 1. So you really don't understand what could happen there. It's an imprecise tool. Similarly, you've all looked at your zoning map and you've seen the red zone, C1, C2, and so on. And we assume, a conventional shopping center. But that red zone could also give you this more walkable place. So there's a lack of precision in the conventional zoning tools that we're so used to. So here it is graphically. A conventional zoning code or Euclidean code thinks about use and density first. That's its primary function. There's always this administration management tool. You've got to process that conditional use permit, the building permit, the site plan, the zone change. There's always that component. And form, the resultant placement of buildings, is really a secondary thing. In an urban form code, we really think about building placement first, those relationships of buildings to buildings and so on. You've always got that administration piece. Use is important, but not the most important thing in an urban form code. So I'd like you to consider this well-intended policy statement. Infill and develop in existing urbanized areas, build affordable multifamily housing near transportation corridors. Sounds like a really great policy. And I think we'd probably consider, well, this thing is sensitive, we'd consider this kind of urban form in response to that policy statement, where you can see the relationship of the buildings to the street, to the public transportation. Whether it's affordable or not, we don't know, but it certainly is multifamily housing. But what may well happen is this. which still meets the intent of that policy statement, but it's a very different urban form that results. And so the precision that's important comes not only in the way the policy is written, but how that policy is applied through the code, and that's how it gets implemented. So the point I'm trying to make is that different places need different regulations. As we understand it through your 2045 plan, an urban form code is one of the outcomes that that vision document looks for the downtown. And so that would become more of, as on the left of the illustration, a walkable urban environment. Still, you're going to have cars around, but you've got a lot of people walking around your downtown, as I saw last night. You'll have some transition spaces, and Lisa and I were looking at that this afternoon as we were coming over here. Some great areas just outside of the downtown where you can transition from that more urban, walkable environment to something that's more conventional suburban. The walkable urban, the transition areas can be well regulated through an urban form code. Whereas the drivable suburban, the remainder of the community, there's no reason why you couldn't leave the existing use-based standards, conventional standards that you have in your code, updated as needed based on the will of the community. But it's the place that dictates the type of regulation. So what is an urban form code? As you can see in the highlighted font there, it fosters predictability, high-quality built environments by regulating land development based on physical form rather than separation of land use. So the emphasis then is the form of the place and the public realm. And the components that we use to create these regulations are the building types, frontage types, and street types, and I'll talk about each of those here in a moment. So let's think about this word public realm. This is that space between buildings, typically not regulated in the zoning code. This is the realm of the city engineer and your public works director. But in an urban form code, it becomes really important because you want to think about that public space because you have so many people actively walking, working, playing, recreating in that public space. So this is the public realm, that space between facades, and it's that semi-public, semi-private space where the front of the building interacts with the street. The building frontage becomes very, very important as a tool to regulate as well. So we're looking at downtown Flagstaff here. This is an example of an illustrative plan. You have a really good illustrative plan with the Downtown 2045 documentation that was done. And it's from this vision that you can now, if you choose to, take it to that next step and create the urban form code. And the first step, building on what you've done already, is to create what we call a regulating plan. And within this plan, you'll identify zones or districts based on the form that you want within each district. The downtown will require bigger buildings than something more towards the periphery that we might call general urban, which might be quite different to the Main Street concept. So let's look at some of the building types that you would use and think about and then associate with those zones. So here's a graphic that came from a code we've worked on. On the right-hand side, you can see little black boxes that identify what building type, identified in the text to the left, would be allowed within those zones. So in these instances, you might have a porch or a stoop that would apply in certain zones rather than others. If you're applying this in a more urban environment, you'd have what we call a commercial block. You've got a number of them in downtown already. And the commercial block would have a certain size and height and configuration and setback from the street, which is identified in the code. And the commercial block of different scales might be appropriate from one zone to another. And then you think about that commercial block and you decide how you want to dress it. What needs to be on the front of the building as it relates itself to the street. And so you would decide if you want a porch or a stoop, or what kind of entryway. Do you want it elevated or level with the street? And again, once you've made that determination, assign that frontage type to various zones, then you would create a standard for that zone and for that frontage type that would be appropriate. Because what you're trying to do is make sure you don't land up with this. And this happens all over the place. I live very close to Phoenix, and a lot of downtown Phoenix is parking garages with walls very similar to this, not conducive to a walkable place. And that's where the street standards come in, because that relationship of the frontage to the street is very, very important. And what the planners will need to do and the council will need to do is to work very carefully and closely with their engineering department to figure out the relationship of traffic lanes, how many through vehicles you want, how much parking you want on the street, the relationship to utilities underground for street trees and so on. You've done a lot of that already, but that's a continuous work that you have to do with an urban form code if that's the path you choose. So let's talk a little bit about some misconceptions. Form-based codes, urban form codes have been around for a number of years now. And it's important to understand that some people are proponents, obviously some are not. And some of the things we've heard is that urban form codes do not regulate use. Well, it's not the primary function of the code, but you do have to be thoughtful about the uses you put in your building type. Do you necessarily want to have a residence immediately above a late night bar or restaurant? Probably not. But it might be appropriate to have an office in that same relationship. So use is important, but it's not the main driving point. Form-based codes dictate architecture and squash creativity. Not really. The code sets out the overall framework of standards within which the architect, urban designer, planner may work and create the building that they want. One of the other complaints is that, or misconceptions, is they're too complicated. It takes time and energy, admittedly up front, yes, to create the code. But once it's in place, because they're so graphically represented as we tried to show you here, they become really easy to use. Because if you've done the graphics right and you've got your supporting standards and tables right, you can very quickly see what building type and what zone and what the standards are for that building type, attach the frontage types, look at the street types, and it's all there. I'm not going to go through all of these, but another one to think about is that misconception that urban form codes are for new development only. Now, they may be. But they may also be applied as you're thinking about in the downtown. And they can be even citywide. Miami 21, the city of Miami applied their form-based codes citywide. They had a unique situation, but in your case, I think a downtown application would be a very logical application. One of the other points to think about is the misconception that they result in by right approval and staff is left out. That's actually not true. I have been an administrator of a form-based code in the city of Flagstaff for a number of years. You still have to have the staff function looking at the role of plans to make sure that the plans match the code. You may not have as many zone changes or conditional use permits, and there may be fewer public hearings. But the point is that the code is predictable. And through the charrette process, the visioning process, the writing process, not only do the residents, property owners, business owners, neighbors know what's anticipated, developers do too. And that predictability is really one of the most important parts of what an urban form code could be. And that really ties into number 12. They're not just friendly to the development community because it is such a public process in order to get these adopted. And because everybody really needs to be at the table. Everybody understands what the product of the code will be. So they're not just supportive of the development community, they're also supportive of residents and property owners. So with that, I'm going to leave it to Lisa to wrap us up, talking about market trends and then some case studies.
Thank you, Roger. So we just have about 10 more slides. I wanted to just talk a little bit about what's going on in the market, and I think it does support some of the things we're talking about, but it also supports implementation of your master plan just in general. So Urban Land Institute puts out a magazine. This came out earlier this year, and it really is asking developers and applicants what local jurisdictions can do to encourage urban development, walkable communities, and densification. And across the board, and these are 3 developers and 1 agency person, they said they really need to look at their plans and codes. So that's exactly what you're doing, so you're in a good place. But this, Chris Lineberger went one step further, and he said they really need to develop an urban form code or form-based code as a tool. It provides certainty, not just for the developers, but all for the community, and it provides more predictable results. And if you're not familiar with Lineberger, he's a developer. He did a lot of work in Albuquerque with the Arcadia Land Company. And there's been a lot of talk about millennials, and it's not just millennials driving the market. As we know, it's also seniors, but they're looking for more walkable places. They want to get in their car less. They want to be close to amenities. They don't all want to be in really dense places. Some of them want more compact, kind of small yards, but they're looking for these kind of environments. This is information from the National Association of Realtors supporting what you're doing in the master plan and talking about how to get there. So kind of looking at these stats. And these are urban form codes across the country. Placemakers is a group that's collecting information. There's hundreds of them across the country in different sized jurisdictions from large to small. Some of the larger jurisdictions are Miami, Denver, Los Angeles. Austin, Texas is developing a code. So east to west, north to south, lots of different jurisdictions with situation or circumstances similar to Las Vegas. And then finally, I wanted to go through just a few case studies of jurisdictions who have adopted these form-based codes and some of the outcomes in terms of metrics and numbers. So the first one we want to look at is Denver. We did not work on the Denver code. A friend of ours did, Peter Park. He was a community development director there. I'm working with him now, but they did a master planning vision document like you did. It was called Blueprint Denver. They looked at areas of change and areas of stability, and the areas of change are really where they focused their urban form code and made a context-based approach. The orange areas they left as more conventional zoning, as Roger talked about. So it doesn't have to be a citywide thing. You can really focus it where you want revitalization, reinvestment, and putting your resources. So in the context-based approach on these urban neighborhoods, urban edge, urban neighborhood, urban center, this is where they focus their urban form code and really put their time and attention there in terms of not just the regulatory environment, but the infrastructure investment and streetscapes also. So it's a whole package that needs to come together to achieve some of the ideas in your master plan. And then in terms of stats and metrics, in Denver at least, they adopted the code in 2010. Over a 4-year period, there was a higher ratio, 2-to-1, of private investment in the areas where they had their urban form code versus their conventional code. Of course, there's a lot of things that come into these numbers. I'm not saying it's a silver bullet, but when they kind of follow what's going on and they track these metrics, this is what they're seeing. They also saw a reduction of waivers, special conditions, rezonings, those kind of things over time. This chart just shows they've been tracking that. This only goes to 2013, but they're seeing similar trends. And this goes through the recession, too. So it's a little bit, I know we're coming out of that, but, you know, these numbers do go through that recessionary period. So we need to take that into account. But they did see a reduction in plan unit development, waivers, et cetera, at the planning counter, front counter. A couple of other things. Petaluma was an early adopter of form-based code. They're probably the first. I worked on it in 2003. Very successful. They created a theater district. They reevaluated the parking standards. There were property taxes increased 3 times, 17% increase in sales taxes. And they went back and amended their form-based code. They didn't get rid of it, but they reevaluated it because it was a good tool. But as any kind of code, it needs to be reconsidered over time. So recently they went back and updated it. But are still using it as a tool in their downtown core, which, I don't know if you know Petaluma, it's just north of San Francisco, historic downtown area. Mesa, Arizona, just outside of Phoenix, it's about 500 people. They ran light rail from Phoenix to Mesa. Super successful. Ridership exceeded their expectations. They developed a form-based code around their light rail for downtown. Now they're thinking of expanding it. Since they've expedited the process, they've seen more interest in some of their downtown parcels, and some of those projects are listed here. We were hoping to have someone from Mesa come today, but they unfortunately could not make it at the last minute. And then this is our last slide. This is put out by PricewaterhouseCoopers Urban Land Institutes. This is Emergent Trends in Real Estate in 2017. They interview hundreds of people across the country, and they really look at what's going on in the different markets. I don't know if you've seen the publication. Actually, Las Vegas is in there for some of the innovative work you've done in your downtown and some of the investment you've done in your downtown. But these are the top 10 hottest markets nationwide. And as you'll see, 8 out of 10 are putting some investment or some money into an urban form code, mostly in downtown or TOD context, similar to what you're looking for, but they see the value in investment, they see the value in design, they see the value in upfront planning for your downtown, so there's more predictability for developers, community, et cetera. And they're just looking at that as one tool in many for continuing those kind of hot economies. Of course, again, there's a lot going on in these regions. This isn't the only thing they're working on, but they are looking at it as a tool for economic development. And we're working on the Austin Code, by the way, so that's in progress. The code's going to come out in January, be adopted in about a year and a half. The two cities up here that don't have form-based codes are Seattle and San Francisco, and those have a lot of good bones and different kind of tools, and they don't feel like they need that, so they haven't adopted that form-based approach as far as I know. I did want to say, though, that Vegas does have good bones. There's a lot of good things going on downtown. You already have a lot of things moving in the right direction. So I think it's a matter of taking that and harnessing that energy and taking it to the next step in terms of your regulations. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Robert.
Thank you.
Okay, so I wanted to really quickly, before we get into questions for the consultants and discussion, just bring you up to speed on our next steps. So after this workshop today, we want to, based on the discussion that you all have and the direction that we receive, we want to continue this dialogue. This is step 1.5, if you would, of this process. We have quite a bit of dialogue to continue, not just with these bodies, but with the community as well. We actually will meet next week with the reconstituted Executive Steering Committee for the downtown plan as we move into this implementation phase. So we have an Executive Steering Committee we'll meet with next Tuesday. We also have already begun work, and we will continue to build on some district-level working groups. As you heard from Roger and Lisa, a code like this, an approach like this, requires quite a bit of involvement from the community. It requires buy-in from our electeds and appointeds, but it really requires the community to buy into this approach, to buy into the concepts and the standards that would be being adopted. And so that is one of our next steps, is to get those working groups really thinking about how the different districts, how those would interact and what would be the standards that are appropriate for the medical district, which are going to be different, again, based on what you heard today, are going to be different than what we have in the arts district, which is going to be different, even though they have some similar kind of ideas behind what they want to do. The arts district in Fremont East are going to have some different standards. They have some different functionality. And so we want to work with the community to build on that. Speaking of community, Mayor, we do have some folks from the community here. I don't know if maybe you'd like to hear from them before you guys start asking questions and kind of having this conversation. They're here if you'd like to invite them up to talk or to provide you with some additional comment or thought that they may have.
No, I think that would be wonderful, and if both Roger and Lisa would be willing to be responsive as we go through each one. Since there are quite a few of you, and since we want to hear from council and planning and give them appropriate time, let's limit this. Do we have a timer over there, City? No. Okay, fine. How about a couple of minutes each? That I think would be adequate. If anybody would care to have any questions, comments, input, if you'd come to the microphone and please say your name for the record. We don't need an address. And don't be shy. This is a brand new member of our community, sort of born and raised here. Pardon?
3 minutes.
How many minutes would you like?
3. I think 3 would be fine. Thank you. You got an extra minute, I'd say 2, but our attorney's
My
always
name's
on
Rick
that.
Truesdell, resident of the city of Las Vegas. I wanted to speak today. One, I have a history with the planning and history with the council, but more realistically, I have a history in the development community. And I didn't do that.
Whoa.
I have been on the committee originally when Robert started the form-based code a year or so ago when he was a much different person. But the biggest concern I have is downtown. You want development. You want activity downtown. You don't want it to be another 10 years of overnight successes. And while I believe this code, some hybrid of this, will start to move things along over time, you still have to find a way to deal with the current code and encourage development. Too much of the time is lost in the development community through small mini waivers. If a developer's 2 parking spaces short, they have to go get a waiver. They have to spend money. They lose 60 days, 90 days, 120 days through the zoning process. I can tell you, developers don't want to come in and do that. They don't want to. They're designing a project to save 2 parking spaces or save 3 inches on a setback instead of 5. They got 4, 9, or something along that line. But I think as this master plan is implemented and as you go through these code adjustments and come out with what you believe to be the long-term solution, we all want to be here when that long-term solution comes into effect. And some of us are getting closer to the end than others, and I'm feeling age all the time. So I'd like to see at least part of your conversation is how can we take our existing code and either create some flexibility in it for staff or yourselves, so all of these little things that happen over the process of a development don't require the builders and the developers to come back in and spend 90 days in the middle of a project. It happens more often than people would think. And I can tell you, most developers would rather pay you twice the review fee up front than to have to go through and cost them 90 days of interest during the construction process. That 90 days of interest could be hundreds of thousands of dollars, where if people have some reasonable flexibility, they can deal with staff on the things that come up. We have issues in this community with the water district saying, I need the silver box here. And the only way it fits on the site, if we meet all the codes that are out there, winds up being encroaching into the public right-of-way. No one wants a smaller sidewalk, but you can't just make the building smaller at that point after you're finished with your development plan. So however you pursue this process, it has to be built in to have that flexibility now so you can keep the development community going. In this community over the last 5 years, Clark County, as a whole, have built thousands of apartments throughout the valley. The apartment boom is, if you listen to some trend analysts, they'll say we're coming to the end of that near-term apartments. We haven't seen any appreciable density created downtown. The community has typically stayed away from that. So there's got to be a better way to reach out to that development community and show them that there is a process they can work through downtown. It isn't loaded with give-me's from the city. It's loaded with how can I help you build something and get through the process. That's going to be the critical part of the medical district in And I looked at the new medical district plan. It came out as the master plan was rolled out. There's 5 or 6 different districts, or 5 districts, I guess. Whereas it's only so big. You could have 2 districts and encourage developers to come in with things. Our setback standards have created our own problems. We want 5 feet or 3 feet or 6 feet between separated buildings on a property line. Those are homeless encampments. Those are crime tunnels for people. So be pragmatic in how you view the code, and be pragmatic how you deal with the development community. I think you'll wind up with a greater tax base in the downtown and medical district and in all of the community, but you'll wind up with developers bringing their best game to the table.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Lisa, would you care to comment and answer some of the points Mr. Truesdell brought up, especially the flexibility? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, those are all good comments. And basically, we say when we go into this work is the world doesn't stop. Things are going to keep happening, and I think you need to address it as it comes. So if we can, if you or we could work with you on early wins and sort of short-term strategies to address some of the things that were brought up, I think that's a a win-win. But I also think you need to keep your your eye on the prize in terms of like the long-term solution. So potentially a two-prong approach, which we have done in some places too. And then the question on flexibility was more, maybe I missed that one, about allowing flexibility. So, yeah, so when we actually, just on flexibility, so when we develop codes, we actually build in a lot of flexibility, or as much flexibility as the community wants. So we can have flexibility at the staff level, what we call a minor modification, to adjust things, like if you just need a little bit of give on a code, especially with an infill code like downtown Las Vegas, it's hard to predict every outcome. So the standards might not work in every outcome, and then we can we leave escape valves for certain things that are more that you want to allow at the staff level to pop up to your planning commission or even council. So we provide a lot of flexibility there too.
Thank you. Thank you. Please state your name for the record.
Sure. Good afternoon. John Curran with the Downtown Project. I think there's a reason a lot of sort of progressive planning departments and municipalities are moving to a form-based code. That I think there's a lot of value to the predictability that comes with it. When I was in planning school, they taught us all the merits of form-based code, and they predicted that more and more municipalities would continue to adopt that. I think Mr. Truesdell mentioned it, but Planning Commission and City Councilmen are often tasked with spending resources and reviewing really trivial matters, simple little variances or little waivers. Again, if it's a few parking spaces, or maybe you don't want to build a certain type of fence that's required, and to have to wait 120 days for that sort of process is frustrating. I had a conversation with Mike Howe yesterday in your planning department, and I thought sort of like the way he described it. In terms of predictability, they said if it complies, it flies. So there's no need to wait that 120-day process. Give the staff the ability to make some discretion and make some decisions, and hopefully it'll take 30 days instead of 120 days. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Good point. Anyone else, please come forward. Shondell.
Good afternoon. Shondell Newsom, local business owner with Some New Marketing. I'm really excited to be a part of the Downtown Master Plan Executive Steering Committee.
We're delighted to have you.
Huh?
We're delighted to have you.
Thank you. I'm really excited because for a number of reasons. I've been in Vegas in April. It'll be 30 years. Came out by way of the United States Air Force, stayed for a decade, and then stayed 20 years later. Married a native Las Vegan. One of the reasons I'm so excited is because I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and my mom still lives in the brownstone we grew up in, and it was a revitalization of downtown Brooklyn that took our brownstone from $1.2 million to $2.6 million, and she was really excited, not just for that, but the fact that they change the whole neighborhood by revitalization. So these type of projects are extremely exciting for me. And as our company was doing outreach for 3 years on the Southern Nevada Strong project, we heard from the community that they're looking forward to change. They're looking forward to innovative and creative ways to kind of, grow downtown. I'm also on the Neon Museum Board, so we're really excited about the revitalization of downtown as well, because as you know, that particular project has grown tremendously, and we get a lot of international visitors, and it would be great to match that energy with what we have in downtown. So I'm really excited about what we're doing, what I'm hearing here today. I'm not a planner. I think I'm a surrogate planner, because I've been asked and tasked to do tons of outreach and on planning projects. But it's been a personal pleasure as well as a professional pleasure to be a part of all of this. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Anytime, Roger or Lisa, you want to comment with any comments that are made, that please come forward. Anyone else with comments before I ask planning or council? Well, thank you. And if in fact you have an issue that all of a sudden ignites in your head or heart, just raise your hand, we'll go see you. So, any questions, comments? Do we want to start down there at the right or the left, or anyone who wishes, just please get my attention. And boy, with shy group.
Mayor?
Yes, Councilman Barlow, please.
Yeah, I was.
And Councilman Anthony right after him.
Testing. Okay. It gets up a little bit closer. Thank you both, Lisa, and was it Robert? I'm sorry? Roger. Roger? Okay, thank you, Lisa and Roger, for your presentation here today. One thing that I believe this council has always agreed on, and that is making our downtown the most attractive downtown that we can make it. Having traveled, for example, to Salt Lake City, who has done a wonderful job with their streetscapes and pedestrian walkways and walkable community in downtown Salt Lake is wonderful. To include what, in fact, Denver is doing, as well as Portland, Oregon, from a walkable community. And I can't leave out the redevelopment of what's taking place in downtown Seattle as well. And so as we move down the Sun Belt of the West Coast into the city of Las Vegas, what we've attempted to do and continuing to do as far as creating those pedestrian and cycle-friendly spaces with the bicycle lanes. There's much more we need to do in relation to softening up the look of our downtown, bringing in attractive landscape, whether it be low or high, tree canopies. I know my chief of staff just returned from San Francisco and showed me some photos of some beautiful sceneries from the standpoint of pedestrian sake in downtown San Francisco, which was very attractive. And so this is the direction that I believe what's going to really set Las Vegas apart. We're known, no other city in the world has a more beautiful night than Las Vegas. But we have so many spotted areas that when the sun comes up, I wish the sun would go back down, because the element of what you see when the sun is up in some of the places in downtown is not as attractive as it is at night. And so I would love to create that connection of the beauty during the day and the beauty that currently exists in our neon lights that come on after dark. And so I'm all for the vibrancy of walkable communities, creating those pedestrian-friendly walkways and canopies and softening of the sidewalks and grass elements, right? But what I did hear from you, and maybe that's a part of the plan, and that's some of the community art. Downtown Chicago, Philadelphia, beautiful, beautiful, mega oversized community art. I believe Las Vegas has an opportunity to really wrap our arms around that as well. And I know we've attempted to do some things around the City Hall, and we're still working toward that, but we really need to do a much better job in regards to creating the opportunity for public art in our walkways in those spaces as well. And so I wanted to hear more in regards to your opinion, your position as it relates to that component as well. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you, Mayor, through the mayor. Yeah, so we didn't get into that amount of detail today, but you're exactly right. That's a really good, important part of the overall outcome. So the return on investment, Chicago, that downtown park, I think has been like 10 times the investment on the infrastructure with the park, connected Michigan Avenue to the waterfront. Same thing with Dallas. They capped that freeway with a TIF, and the investment around that park, and those investments have been tremendous too for the city of Dallas if you've been there recently. So like all of these pieces coming together, there's a return on investment with green space, parks, and art invested in the right place and the right time. So it would definitely be part of this process. We'd go back to your vision document to see what it said, but absolutely it's a key component.
And Mayor, if you will, I did see, and I have to give, and forgive me if I get the department wrong, but I believe it was Bill Arndt's department that showed me a plan that we have for Symphony Park as far as an elevated pedestrian walkway. And I believe I have the right department. I hope I have the right department as far as what Symphony Park could look like. And I believe having the ability to carry that level of architecture and site view adjacent, for example, to the railroad tracks, really having the opportunity to play with those hardscapes, those unmovable pieces, but bringing in some new innovative architecture and contour of what can be wrapped around it to make it more attractive and also make it seamless in regards to making it appear as though it all works collectively is very important as to how, in fact, we basically wrap the crust of our downtown as well. And as I stated in many conversations, such as what we're having here today, as far as all roads leading into downtown, is very vital because each one of our wards wrap around the downtown area, and so everything ties into our downtown like tentacles, and having an opportunity to carry that message or that beautification look out into our respective wards is very key in the process of making sure that the core is taken care of as we continue to work outward into the suburban core of Las Vegas in our respective districts. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Anthony?
Thank you. So I was interested in the one slide that has changes in market fundamentals, and it talks about the millennials. So if I heard you correctly in the corner of the slide, when we design downtown, we should take into consideration the kind of the habits of millennials, right?
Yes.
And according to this, they want to walk more, which is fine, and they want to live in attached housing, condos, apartments, things like that. So I'm trying to understand the millennial generation. So when I was around 25 years old, which I think is right around what we're talking about, I would walk to work and I would live in an attached house because I was broke. I mean, I didn't have any money, so that's how you got around but my mindset was that I'm going to accumulate wealth. I'm going to eventually buy a big house, and I'm going to have kids, and I'm going to eventually have a Corvette, you know, and or maybe two, you never know. But the mindset was I'm going to do this at the beginning, but I'm eventually going to move on to something else. So when it comes to millennials, is this a lifestyle that they want to keep moving forward when they're 40 or 50 years old? Or do they have the same mentality that this is for a short period of time and then they want to move on? So when we talk about designing this stuff, are we designing it for a generation that's going to move on and then there's nobody there to replace it, and it becomes kind of desolate because I don't know what the next generation before them is going to want to live. So trying to get my arms around how that works.
Right. Well, I think everybody's trying to figure out millennials.
And if we have some in the audience, I'd be
In
glad to
terms-
hear from you.
Yeah. In terms
Because
of,
when you design these, I mean, you're putting a lot of time and effort into this, and you want it to be sustainable for the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years.
absolutely. And, with the millennials, I think there's a lot going on. I think some of it is cost factors. And frankly, in some markets, they can't afford the downtown core anymore. So they're moving to the first ring suburbs anyway, because it's already sort of, the downtowns have gotten so expensive and so hot that they can't afford there. I also think with the millennials, there's going to be financing challenges with purchasing homes, like the way the banking industry works has changed in terms of down payments, financing structures, et cetera, after the mortgage meltdown. But I think they do look for, they will be looking for some upward mobility. There's some indication that over time they might want to move out a little bit from a downtown core, but they want to be close. They still want to be in compact, walkable areas. So, maybe not in the condo right in your downtown core, but like a half mile out. So they're not very far, and they could still get on transit, and they don't have to completely rely on the automobile, as some of our farther flung suburbs have been over time. That's what we're hearing from the surveys. That's our understanding of where they're going. But in terms of investing in downtown, too, I think you have to take a long-term view. There's a renaissance going on with urban development nationwide, and not just nationwide, internationally, right? And it's been that way for some time. We sort of, after World War II, we sort of wrecked our downtowns with redevelopment and different things, freeway construction, et cetera. But I think if we look at it as a long-term investment, that investment will hold over time. They're more sustainable, less resources. All of those things are kind of coming together to make downtown sort of the winning bet. Not the only thing, but creating a strong economy for the region.
Mayor, if I may add to that, Councillor Anthony, it's also about the baby boomer generation. Now, those of us with as much gray hair as we have are getting tired of mowing the lawn. The kids have left the house. We don't need those big homes anymore. And there's some very, very interesting statistics put out by Arthur C. Nelson from ASU, where he's been studying demographic change and urban development for many years. And it's showing how boomers are now moving into the cities and taking over and living with millennials in this kind of urban housing. And it is a very, very powerful market. And it's really the boomers that are helping to push those downtown values up so high, because they're the ones who've accumulated the wealth. So it's a very, very interesting mix. If you look for Arthur C. Nelson, look at some of his demographics. It's fascinating stuff. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I do see it, having grown up in the heart of New York City, and do see the cyclical nature of people moving out to the suburbs, and then the deterioration of the heart of the cities, and then the revitalization and the concentration, and then that forces lower or low middle income back out somewhere else, because you fill one hole and plug it up, it's going to come out somewhere else. Anyone planning? Yes, Mr. Cherry.
Thank you, Mayor. How is the character of a district ultimately decided? How does that come about?
Well, in their master plan, I think you have 10 districts, and a lot of that character is in the master plan, the visioning, but if you were going to go into an urban form coding process, you would have additional outreach to really fine-tune that in more detail. We often have a design charrette focused on those areas where you get people, designers, at tables, rolling up their sleeves, noodling over stuff, drawing ideas, and then that information feeds into the code. I think it'd be important with a master plan like you have to make sure, or try to make sure, that your districts have different kinds of characters and different kinds of intensity, so that it's not just one big thing and anything goes across the whole downtown. You think of it as unique areas, and I think that would help create value and create, interesting neighborhoods.
So if there's a character of a neighborhood, and I wake up one day and decide I want to build a high-rise, but it doesn't necessarily fit within the character, is there a process to, if you can get neighborhood to jump on board, is there a process to bring that forward?
Repeat your question.
So there's a character of a neighborhood developed. It's mid-rises like the beautiful picture. And all of a sudden I wake up and I have something by Las Vegas Boulevard in the Arts District. Is there a process to bring forward something much larger in scale if they wanted to?
Oh, yeah. So the form-based regulations would provide more regulation than you have, because in some ways you don't, there's no height limit, right, for your downtown under the Centennial Plan. So there would be more specificity in the regulations under a form-based code or urban form code. But if you wanted to allow things outside of that, you could have a process to do that in the code. Yeah, we could build in a minor use permit, a conditional use permit, something that you could, again, it's as a escape hatch to allow flexibility.
Last question. Is there a feeling that form-based codes that come into areas get landowners to either sell or develop faster?
Well, so do people come into a form-based code area quicker because they see opportunity? Is that?
Well, I mean, there's in downtown, and I live in the Arts District, there's a lot of landowners that maybe feel that a high-rise is going to be built on their place when that's not necessarily so, and some of them will get high-rises. But is there a feeling that now that you've kind of set this roadmap forward for an area, that really kind of defines it, what the landowner has or what they can build, or have a developer build to, and helps them move that land along? Because, we've sat around the Arts District, and while things are happening, there's still a lot of vacant parcels that the landowner thinks that there's going to be a 40-story high-rise on.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you would set the expectations for the area that were more appropriate for the opportunities in the area based on the market. Because, for instance, if you did get a 40-story high-rise on one property in the Arts District, that might absorb all your market potential for 10 years. So then the other guys have nothing. So I think you got to think about it like that, too. Like, what is your market potential? How are you going to spread it around through your downtown? And how did that make sense in terms of creating character that's appropriate for the neighborhood? So it would set expectations in terms of what's allowed and what's not allowed. Building on consensus, those neighborhoods, those property owners, and other developers in the area. We really work closely with all the different stakeholders to figure out the right mix.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Moody, I'm going to let you just get everybody coming right to you, and I'll do the same the other direction.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Commissioner Creer?
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for you. Talk to me a little bit about how do you create this environment and this form code environment, but also take into consideration of citizens that have currently living in the community that have been living there for generations, and how do you allow them to come along with the process or not come along with the process, unfortunately? You sort of talked about going into new communities, and you talk about, exchanging existing communities as well. Talk to me a little bit about that.
I can take it. So we're working with that in Austin, actually. There's a lot of concern because of housing costs, the really hot market, gentrification, and some of the neighborhoods' displacement. It's not an easy answer, honestly. I think it's a lot, we would need to bring the best minds together and figure out what's going on the ground and in what neighborhoods are most heavily impacted. But I think it's working with the community, it's working with you folks, it's thinking about what the right amount of development is in that area, it's thinking about programs to protect maybe or preserve some of the units that are already there from a programmatic standpoint. It's not maximizing entitlement so that there's a lot of incentive to redevelop some of the areas you want to protect. I mean, it could be a series of different things to think about based on the context and what's really right for Vegas. So I think we need to work with you guys to kind of work that out. But in Austin, for instance, we're doing, in some areas we're reducing entitlements. In some areas we're working on a density bonus program, so there's no net loss. We're looking at inclusionary housing in other places so that if you build something, you do build some affordable units with your project. So just like a series of different tools in different jurisdictions to kind of work through these issues.
And in terms of cost, have you worked in jurisdictions where you've created like SIDs somewhere to help cover costs of the advancement of the community, or you talked about TIF funding for some of the areas?
Like a special improvement district or something like that?
Sorry,
Yeah. So we've done a lot of special districts, business improvement districts, TIF financing, those kind of things, a sort of focus money. So in a density bonus program too, you could have an in lieu fee option out, so you create a pot of money through that. Inclusionary ordinance sometimes have fee out options, so you can collect money through those. Linkage fees can generate money for affordable housing. These have to be mandated by state law, and I don't know all the state law in Nevada off the top of my head. But there's different programs out there like that we could look at.
And last question. So from knowing our downtown area, where would you start? Do you start with seeking more density for bodies downtown? Do you look for more entertainment, look for more recreational?
That's a good question.
Great question.
Well, I would focus on where things are already happening, because as I said earlier, the downtown is really big. So if you just have isolated successes in 8,500 acres, you're never going to create the critical mass. You need to really start to sort of transition and keep the ball rolling. So I would focus on areas where there's already stuff going, things that make sense, where your light rail, your transit's going to be. Those areas, I think, are sort of the low-hanging fruit in terms of, first steps. So I would kind of look at, some of those things and then decide how to move forward. In Austin, Austin's a really big city too, and they want to do form-based code everywhere, but they don't have the time and they don't have the money. So we're spending a lot of time figuring out what are the right areas to apply that, based on transit, based on where the market wants to go, based on gentrification, politics. All of these things are kind of layering up to figure out the right spots. They also did a vision document we're looking at for the citywide. It's called Imagine Austin, to identify the priority areas. So we would go through a process like that and see what made sense, or you could maybe get public-private partnerships working, and those kind of opportunities.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Commissioner Trowbridge.
Thank you. The page that you have, or the exhibit you had that is titled The Urban Forum Codes and Misconceptions, very interesting. I think we've got a unique situation here in Las Vegas. We don't have the very sophisticated mass transportation system. We don't have a population demographics that meet the national standards. We have a much heavier senior citizen group. We have as I've read, a smaller group of millennials coming forward. Population is down. And I would caution that we simply be aware that we're different. We always say that. Everybody says that, but we really are. One of the things that we I've heard that has bothered me, having served on the Planning Commission for a while, is that these delays that we have that increase costs and time delays really and truly need to be addressed. But at the same time, the thought of having development by right scares me, because everything changes. We're all probably a little bit sensitive right now because we're going through probably what is one of the largest infill projects. Any other city, it wouldn't be an infill project. It would be something else and would be handled differently. And I would hope we can find a nice balance between giving some expedited processes that are going to eliminate this necessity to come forward and say, I'll redesign my project because I'm 2 parking places short. That is, the cost versus benefit is just not conducive to encouraging people to come in and invest in a particular area. It's easier to go ahead and let's go with more of the sprawl, because out there you don't have the neighbors coming complaining. You don't have these old restrictions. You've got to have 5-foot setback, and all we can make any money on is it's a 3-foot setback, and somebody's got to be able to decide without just saying, well, look, I know it's going to cost you money, but because of that, I've got this other idea that's only cost you a little more, and delay the project. It's not right. Some of our infill projects are on vacant lots. Some are vacant because years and years it's a problem parcel. And I think we need to be able to address somehow those problem parcels. And I'll bet you the planners here could go through with a magic marker and a map and circle every problem parcel in the valley. And we just keep jamming the potential developers for that parcel problem to go through the same mechanisms than a much easier developed parcel. We need to be responsive to the needs. That's some of my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Slotman.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Question. If we're more focused on the form versus the use, how's the underlying zoning work? Because we might have residential, professional office, next lot would be commercial, currently existing. So if the use doesn't matter, how's the underlying zoning work?
Well, the use does matter. We still have use tables in a form-based code or urban form code. But I think what happens now, why you have this mixed match between uses and standards, is because you go back to Title 19 for your uses, and then you have different uses next to each other, or different uses even across the street. So what you can do on one side of the street, you can't do on the other side of the street. Even on your important corridors, where I think you would want facing uses, it just makes sense. But the way the current code works, it makes that difficult. So even though an urban form code, it's the design matters and the form matters, but we still have use tables. A list, sometimes it can be as long or as short as you want them. There's no one way. And you would have a permitted by right, maybe an administrative or staff level review, and then things that still pop up to the Planning Commission. And getting back to the earlier comment just about process, we can have as much process as we want. You can develop thresholds that makes most sense for Las Vegas. So I think that's important to remember too. There's no one size fits all. There's lots of ways to go about this. We really need to calibrate it to local expectations and local concerns so that your big projects get the review you want, and the things that are small and make sense and comply with your code don't get hung up on a lot of red tape, become really expensive and time-consuming for everybody, including the city. It's time-consuming on both sides when you think about that.
Specifically, if something's not zoned mixed use and you want to put in mixed use development, if it's zoned residential, it's still going to have to go through Planning Commission and City Council.
Well, yeah. Well, if you adopt a new code and you have a use table and your use is allowed in that, then it's allowed by right or whatever the permit level is. And if it's not allowed, then it's not allowed in that zone. You would have to move it to another zone. I mean, is that your question? That's kind of how it typically works, and that's how it would work under the new code.
Okay, so it really doesn't expedite anything in the realm of zoning. Is pretty much what I'm hearing. Is that correct?
Well, maybe
Yes.
Mayor, Mr. Chairman, and Vice Chair Schlotman, I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, the zoning that exists today is going to go away. And the new set of zones associated with the form that you want in that place will come in, whether you call it a transect zone or a general urban zone or whatever. And that becomes the new entitlement for that property owner.
Okay.
And within that zone, let's call it general urban now, Lisa's correct. You'll have a list of permitted uses by right and permitted uses with a minor use permit or conditional uses that'll go to the Planning Commission.
Okay.
But you're taking the old or putting it away, putting new stuff in its place.
Okay. And then as far as
at least that's what we would recommend.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But will the new master plan replace the downtown Centennial Plan, the redevelopment area, or a much larger area?
I think that's a city question that it could be applied different ways, but we would recommend that you identify the areas in the master plan that are appropriate for form-based coding, and then create a new code for those areas that would replace the decennial plan and replace the regulations in Title 19 that apply to those, and you have one set of regulations.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Mayor? Oh, excuse me, you were going to talk.
Well, no, I didn't know if you were on a timeline, because what I was hopeful of doing was asking Chairman Moody to make his comments. I'll be very brief, make mine, then come right on through, because I want to turn it back to Mr. Sommerfeld to go ahead and pull this together, then one last public comment, because we're supposed to adjourn by 4:30. So if that works for you, or do you have to leave?
For me, which week? either way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, my comments have been covered by the other councilmen and commissioners, so on behalf of the Planning Commission, I want to thank you for your presentation. Very helpful, very educational. Thank you. Mayor?
Thank you. And I usually go at the end, but since we're trying to get this methodically through all of us, so we can all have a moment, I had just a couple of comments just to throw out there, not necessarily at this time for response, but about the retroactivity and a timeline. And then, as you say, you pull back all zoning, put the new policy in, and then the compliance and the last piece. So it's retroactivity, timeline, compliance, and funding. And of course, knowing the funding is a huge issue as we go to those beautiful photographs. So I just, at some point, but I don't want to take the time now because it may be reiterated down here, so I'm going to turn it to Mayor Pro Tem. And thank you both for the time you've given this. It's really been very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Yes, thank you both very much. Also, I want a couple of comments I'd like to say. Director Perigo started this presentation out with the words bold and courageous, I believe is what you termed our plan, as aggressive. And I like to say that because I always want the city of Las Vegas to always be bold and courageous, especially in its leadership role in this community. I absolutely see the opportunity I want to say jumpstart the economic development downtown, but we've been working on that for a long, long time. And it's been very successful. I think this is moving it up to the next level of that success, and where do we go now? It certainly, in the developer's perspective, sets that certainty and standard of expectations and what to expect in the downtown core. So it's good to see the entire Planning Commission here as well, ask their questions, because it's going to hit them long before it hits us. I do want to make some comments about Commissioner Truesdale's comments. I think he's left us, but he's right about the process. If a developer, we need to get rid of 2 or 3 parking spaces, then they're back in with paperwork, writing another check. It's got to go to Director Perigo's department. His team's got their arms wrapped around it. The lobbyist comes in to visit the council, goes visits the planning commissioner who represents that area. It's a long, arduous task. I've always talked about streamlining the process, and we've done that in our business area. When I got elected years ago, we were a large bureaucracy that took a lot of time to get through the process. We're not like that business-wise now. We have a development services center. We're focused on the customer, our residents, our clients, and we're providing that service level to them. We're trying to do the same thing in planning and development, and I think we're going to get there. I do want to have a question, and it's probably for either Commissioner Schlotman or Commissioner Cherry. A lot of these photos we've seen of some of these other cities and the successes they've had have been mixed use, and I think you brought it up, the mixed use type development. My understanding from the development community is that it's difficult to get financing behind the mixed use developments. Your Honor, with your permission, can I ask one of them to respond to that? Or
I'd be happy to. Yes, it is difficult to get financing. It's also difficult to build because there's so many transitions from a retail or office use to parking to residential. So Roger mentioned living upstairs and having a late night place down below. I happen to live upstairs at the late night place down below in the Arts District, and it was costly to build, very costly to build.
And that's my concern too, because these are all great, and I think our focus as we go forward, because my next comment here is where to now. I think we get where we're going to now. We're going to have charrettes. We're going to engage the community and engage the stakeholders in downtown as we continue to go down this pathway. But I think it's the right thing to do. I think it's that next level of planning and development, if you will. And I think this isn't a cookie cutter approach either. And this could change in 5 years. This could change in 10 years. New planning director, new council, new planning commission. Things could be a success, and I think it would be a major success, but they could fail as well. We might have to change directions. So those are my comments, Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilwoman Tarkanian, please.
I remember when I first came on the council, they had so many tumbleweeds and trash in the lots. Oscar was mayor at that time, and we didn't look good at all downtown. And, he would talk about things, and I'd say, my God, can we get that done? And I think we have done so much of it through the people who have worked during those years. And as I wanted to say how much I appreciate this, and I think I'm the longest term person so right now on the council, and how much I've learned as things have changed. I look, for example, on that big red wall you had where you talked about building form, the frontage elements. They did that right across from our community college, and at the time I said, that looks so ugly. Why are we doing this? Because planners at that time thought the parking should be inside, not outside. And I have to tell you, every time I pass by there, I cringe. And the person who was in charge of planning at the time, I remind that person every time I see her, and she says she cringes also. So we're all learning in this. One question I had is that you talk about create streets for people, and you show all of these pictures. Only one, and that was in Petaluma, did I see bicycles. And we have worked very hard. In fact, a member of my staff's on the state bicycle committee to move towards more bicycle lanes. However, now I'm reading in some of the governance magazines and planning magazines that perhaps we've gone too far, that maybe not that many people are using them in all the places. And they're not just talking about downtown, they're talking about other parts of the city. Motorists are complaining it takes up too much room. People are saying, well, it's dangerous for the bicyclists that close to. So I'm asking, I didn't see much in here about that. Do you have any comments about that? Should we keep on pushing hard?
Well, I mean, I think the short answer is yes, but I think you need to look, I mean, and I think, us focusing on pedestrians was just kind of in a short presentation and looking at your master plan where we decided to bring it up, but we would look at multi-layered, multimodal streets, that make sense for Vegas again. So what is the right mix of pedestrian, auto, and bike and transit combination? And with a downtown like you have, there's going to be trade-offs within the right-of-way, and what are the trade-offs? That you need between on-street parking, bike lanes, pedestrians, wider sidewalks, etc. But it needs to be looked at on a corridor by corridor basis, and we are still advocating for bike lanes. I mean, in general. I need to look at your bike system. I know you've done a lot of investment on that. It was my understanding it was working well. But as part of this process, we could work with you and revisit that.
But this is something still that we haven't changed our thoughts on that in development and planning and management, right?
Right.
Right, okay. It's just so much you have to learn. How excited I was to learn when we were taken down to Los Angeles and shown the smaller streets and being told that it's better to have narrow streets sometimes, right? It handles the traffic better. You have less accidents, which was something that we would never think about. I'm just saying all of this because it's very exciting with the information you give us. It's very exciting to keep on learning. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to defer, if it's all right with you, Councilman Barlow, for 1 second, and Councilman Anthony, to go down to Councilman Beers and Coffin so they each get a chance, if that's all right. Then we'll come back.
I thought they were.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm deferring my remaining time to Councilman Coffin.
Am I next, or is Councilman Barlow?
No. You haven't had a chance, even though you
Thank you.
asked Roger to repeat his name.
Thank you. Now I know Roger's name. Thank you very much. I
Councilman
represent
Coffin.
downtown, and I lived in downtown for 65 years, and so I've seen the benefits of a downtown, and I've seen it evolve from good to bad to maybe good again, and it is in transition. And when I grew up, there was no air conditioning here, so every storefront, every place had to have a portico continuous along the sidewalk. It was a very walkable town because there was no air conditioning. The technological achievement of air conditioning has been to ruin the walkability of a city, especially downtown Las Vegas, because now you have concrete and glass and steel right up to a sidewalk or even a setback, and it's an oven. So I think that now we are on the way to fixing that. The Arts District comes to mind. It was in your presentation, but the reproduction wasn't very good. I couldn't read the detail. But that's a headache for me because the Arts District is in my ward. And I noticed that, and I've been trying to get an amendment from staff for quite a while on this, because they made the mistake, it seems to me, of wanting everyone in business, in real estate, there to be in the same business, in essence. It's arts, therefore anything that supports arts. And these are the ones we want. And I found out that you needed a special text amendment to allow someone to grow hydroponically fragile, small vegetables for fine dining in the Arts District. And that was silly. And, you know, we still have this thing. And I hope form-based zoning can help, because if it feels good, it ought to be, and if it's cool, it ought to fit. I cannot see where, for example, it would hurt an arts district or something else to have a 40-story building in it, because arts should be where artists are. But they can be supported by other property owners, too. Tax base goes up when you have tax revenue from an expensive environment, because ultimately you're sitting on land that's worth a lot more. Therefore, nothing happens, as opposed to allowing something to happen, and therefore then preserve the rest of that area, because it will be wasteland. So if form-based zoning or the context-based approach can help, I'm all for it, because I've seen the downside of what we have, where we let people pick and choose what they think they ought to have in their neighborhood, and it's ridiculous, because a group doesn't know today what they're going to like tomorrow, especially artists. You know, they're good, just like politicians. They're finicky. They change their minds. Well, you know, this board of directors 2 years later finds out, well, we don't like what that other board did, so therefore they object to the council about something. And I'd like to take them out of the mix and make what is cool and the defining aspect, what looks good, what feels good, to be the parameter, as opposed to this cookie cutter approach of it's got to fit within this certain look and it's got to be this certain use. Granted, uses sometimes are just not compatible. Council can easily decide that on a moment's notice. So I hope that form-based can work for us, because if our staff believes in it, and they have been sitting on this frustrated, I think, for a long time, and they finally got up the guts to bring forth the idea of change. If this is the case, and if this is the change, then I'm all for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Coffin. Councilman Barlow, please.
Yes, Mayor. Great job.
Oh. Councilman Anthony, back to you. Nothing else? And Councilman Beers, we miss your wise counsel.
I would cede my remaining time to Councilman Coffin.
No more.
I already did.
No more.
There is professional courtesy among thieves, Your Honor.
I think I want to thank you very, very much. I want to bring Mr. Summerfield back up here.
Thank you,
But
Mayor.
I think, is it not appropriate to have a motion? What did Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, I don't think there's any public comment, as this is not a public hearing. I think it would be appropriate to make a motion to accept the report on agenda item 5. I agree.
Okay.
That's my motion.
So, you need 8 to pass this?
Okay.
It's a good question. Mr. Scott, do we all get to vote together?
Well, let's see. I know we're in unison here.
Separate bodies? Kind of a historic moment.
Okay, so do we need a motion then from the Planning Commission first? Our motion's on the floor, but should planning go first?
Since it's a joint meeting, Mayor, one person can make the motion, and then the clerk will indicate that the majority of each board voted.
Okay, so I may call the question?
Yes.
All those in favor signify by aye, please.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Now, I'm going to give it back to you, but if you will turn to agenda item number 7, Mayor Pro Tem.
Actually 6, I believe, Your Honor.
Yes, we're on 6 now.
Okay, I would make a motion to obey agenda item 6 to the January 4th City Council meeting, and that would go concurrently with the January 10th Planning Commission meeting, correct? That's my motion.
All in favor, please signify by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries. Now back to you, and then agenda item 7 will be citizen participation.
Mayor, I just wanted to again thank everyone for their time and energy today. Both staff, my staff put quite a bit of time and effort into this. Lisa and Roger for coming to town to help us with this. Just again, as a reminder, this is the opening dialogue on how we move this process forward. So look forward to more information, more discussions, small working groups with the community, with the neighborhoods, with the downtown districts as we move this forward. And we want to thank everyone for their time and attention to this, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.
And we want to thank you very, very much. We want to thank both of you. A token from Las Vegas. Good luck, Mayor Chip. $1,000 chips. And we do thank you. And Mr. Perigo, did you wish to, pardon me for not getting up. It's good luck and good health. Happy holidays. Happy New Year to you.
Thank you, Roger.
Thank you. All right, we will now move to Agenda Item 7, citizen participation. Public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters within the jurisdiction of the City Council and Planning Commission. No subject may be acted upon by the City Council and Planning Commission unless the subject is on the agenda scheduled for action. If you wish to be heard, please come to the podium, give your name for the record. The amount of time of discussion, any single subject, as well as the amount of time any single speaker is allowed, may be limited. Anyone who wishes to speak under Agenda Item 7? Hearing and seeing no. Oh, did somebody stand? No. Nope. I want to thank staff. I want to thank our city marshals who always take such good care of us all the time. But most importantly, I want to thank our wonderful Planning Commission, our great City Council. It's just grand for all of us to be together, and it's nice to have it streamlined. This would make it so much easier. You wouldn't have to be here till midnight on Tuesdays. I know you'd like it. But we had our first taste last council. As you know, we went to 11:45, so we know what it's like. But anyway, thank you all and everyone that participated, our millennial gentleman that spoke there. Thank you for your comments, everyone, and this meeting is adjourned. And
Madam
thank
Mayor,
you again.
even though it's
And
after
this
the
special
meeting-
Planning Commission meeting is also adjourned.